Benefactor, a story. He stands tall yet burdened. Draped in solemn dignity, his eyes gaze not at us but beyond us, into the weight of history itself. This is Benefactor by Ivan-Valentyn Zadorozhny, a painting that does not simply portray a man, but an entire philosophy of duty, sacrifice, and the eternal debt between giver and receiver. Yet who is this man? A king? A noble? Or perhaps something far greater, a symbol of the very soul of Ukraine? The mystery begins here, in the silence of his figure. The benefactor is not named, not tied to a single person. Instead, Zadorozhny paints an archetype, the timeless guardian who gives without expecting reward. But behind that archetype is a profoundly human story, the story of a nation scarred by oppression, yet kept alive by those who chose to give more than they had, to hold faith when faith was all that remained. Created in the later decades of the 20th century, Benefactor emerged from a Ukraine suffocated by Soviet rule. Zadorozhny, trained in monumental art and iconography, infused his works with the grandeur of medieval frescoes yet laced them with quiet rebellion. In Benefactor, the man's heavy robes, sculptural posture, and almost icon-like presence recall Byzantine saints and Renaissance donors. But his eyes, weary, questioning, nearly broken, reveal something else. A benefactor who has given so much that he is hollowed out by sacrifice. Imagine Zadorozhny in his Kiev studio, layering tempera and oil with the discipline of an iconographer. His strokes are deliberate, restrained, heavy with meaning. He softens the face into pale stone-like stillness, a reminder that those who give of themselves become monuments long before they die. Around him, the 1970s Soviet cultural climate tolerated grand historical canvases but feared works that carried too much individuality, too much spiritual fire. Benefactor walked the tightrope. Officially, a tribute to generosity; unofficially, a lament for the forgotten martyrs of Ukraine's cultural memory. The artistic process mirrors liturgy. The plain, dark background elevates the figure into timelessness, as though he were suspended outside of history. His hands, powerful, weathered, seem ready to give, yet also drained, fingers curling inward as if clinging to his last reserves. His robes fall in sharp, monumental folds, echoing mosaics in St. Sophia of Kiev, where holy men stare down the centuries with the same quiet gravity. Zadorozhny does not paint a man. He paints a ritual. Symbolism saturates every line. The benefactor is faceless in identity but heavy in meaning. He embodies every Cossack who gave land for freedom, every peasant who fed the starving, every monk who preserved knowledge in candlelit cells. The dark tones around him signify struggle, oppression, famine, war. Yet his light face radiates with stoic endurance, a beacon in the surrounding void. The benefactor is not rich, nor adorned with jewels. His wealth is invisible, spiritual, eternal. And yet there is conflict here. Look at his eyes, not triumphant, not serene. They seem almost to ask, was it worth it? The benefactor gives endlessly, but who remembers him? Who honors those whose names dissolve in time, leaving only acts? Zadorozhny raises a haunting question. Is sacrifice the highest glory, or the deepest tragedy? The reception of Benefactor was muted in its time. In Soviet exhibitions, it was framed as a tribute to collective spirit, stripped of its national undertones. But for those who could read between the lines, the painting whispered of Ukraine's hidden saints, men and women who preserved language, faith, and dignity against forces that tried to erase them. Over time, the painting has grown heavier, not lighter, in its resonance. In today's Ukraine, it speaks not of the past alone, but of every soldier, every volunteer, every nameless giver who sustains the nation's survival. Stand before Benefactor and you will feel it. The silence pressing in, the eyes that do not meet yours but cut through you. You begin to sense that you, too, are implicated. That perhaps, in some unspoken way, you are both the receiver of sacrifice and the one called to give. The painting becomes not just history but prophecy. And so the benefactor remains, eternal, anonymous, and unforgotten. His face carved in light, his soul buried in silence. A man, a symbol, a ghost. He is the giver who haunts us all, whispering, "What will you leave behind?" Zadorozhny's creative surge, Atilla reflects both the artist's fascination with history and his subtle rebellion against Soviet narratives. Atilla was no saint, no benefactor. He was raw force, untamed will. And yet, in Zadorozhny's hands, even this terrifying ruler becomes monumental, sculpted with reverence and dread alike. In choosing Atilla, Zadorozhny was confronting the ancient ghosts of Ukraine's steppes, the nomads, warriors, and conquerors whose shadows lingered over his nation's soil. Imagine the artist at work, Hunched in his studio, surrounding himself with fragments of chronicles, sketches of Scythian ornaments, echoes of steppe songs. His brush moves slowly, almost ceremonially, as though each line of Attila's armor must be carved into eternity. The colors are brutal, earth tones, iron grays, blood reds, tones of fire and soil. Light slashes across Attila's face, chiseling it like stone, as if Zadorozhny wanted him to appear half man, half monument. Composition reveals intention. Attila dominates the canvas, not with flamboyant gesture, but with immovable gravity. His helmet gleams with sharp, predatory edges, a crown of conquest rather than legitimacy. His garments are severe, heavy with folds that suggest both command and burden. The background, barren and storm-dark, speaks of the endless steppe, the restless horizon from which Attila emerged like a thunderbolt. Nothing distracts from him. The painting forces us to stand before power itself, naked and unsoftened. But beneath the surface lies Zadorozhny's subtle genius. Look at Attila's eyes. They are not wild with rage. They are controlled, cold, almost sorrowful. This is not the cartoon barbarian of Roman fear, but a man who understands the weight of destiny. Zadorozhny paints not just the conqueror, but the loneliness of command, the burden of carrying nations on one's shoulders, the knowledge that history will never forgive, only remember. The symbolism is layered. Attila here is less about the Huns themselves and more about archetype, the eternal commander, the ruler who bends the world by force of will. To Ukrainians, the Scythian lineage in the title is deliberate, a reminder that the land of steppes has always birthed warriors, that nomadic fire still pulses beneath the soil. Zadorozhny ties past to present, from Scythians to Cossacks, from Attila to every leader who shapes Ukraine's fate. The social context sharpens the drama. In the Soviet Union, history was carefully curated, heroes selected, villains erased. By painting Attila, Zadorozhny stepped outside the script. He chose a figure who could not be comfortably claimed, who unsettled both East and West. To some viewers, the painting glorified violence. To others, it revealed the eternal need for strength in a world where weakness meant extinction. In truth, it was both, and that tension was the painting's power. Reception was cautious. Attila was admired for its monumental technique, its almost fresco-like solidity, but it was rarely celebrated openly. It was too dark, too ambiguous, too unsettling. Yet with time its significance grew. Today it speaks with chilling relevance. We see in Attila the same questions that haunt modern leaders. What is the cost of power? Is the ruler a savior or a scourge? And when the earth itself remembers your footsteps, is that legacy a blessing or a curse? Stand before Attila and you will feel it. The silence, the suffocation of presence. His eyes seem to pierce centuries, asking not for your admiration but your acknowledgement. Would you have followed me? Would you have stood against me? Or would you, like the Romans, have knelt before the fire? And so Attila remains, not just as a man of history but as a mirror. In Zadorozhny's vision he becomes both conqueror and ghost, both ruler and ruin. His face is carved in paint, his spirit chained in silence. Yet his question burns still, unanswerable, eternal. The founder of the Kiev school iconographer Alipio, a story. The candlelight flickers across ancient stone walls. A monk bends low over a wooden board, grinding pigment, whispering prayers, his brush moving like a hymn across the surface. This is not just painting. It is devotion, ritual, almost alchemy. And here, in Ivan-Valentyn Zadorozhny's The Founder of the Kiev School iconographer Alipio, we see the man who began it all, Alipio of the Kiev Caves. A figure veiled in legend, saint, artist, craftsman, the father of Ukrainian iconography. But who was he really? And why did Zadorozhny bring his image back from the mists of time? History remembers little of Alipio. He lived in the 11th century, a monk of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, one of the first great centers of Christianity in Eastern Europe. He is called the founder of the Kiev school of icon painting, the man who taught generations to blend Byzantine tradition with the spirit of the Ukrainian land. Yet most of his works have vanished, stolen by centuries, burned in wars, dissolved by time. What remains is memory, and Zadorozhny, centuries later, dared to give him a face. The painting was born in a time of searching. For Zadorozhny, the 20th century was a world where faith was suppressed, where icons were often hidden, where spiritual art was either tolerated or destroyed. To paint Alipio was an act of defiance, to reclaim the root of Ukrainian sacred culture and proclaim it unbroken. He was not just painting a monk. He was painting survival, continuity, and the eternal spark of faith. Imagine the artist in his studio. Perhaps he sat in silence, the faint scent of incense in the air, sketches of Byzantine frescoes scattered around him. His brush traced Alipio's features slowly, reverently, as if afraid to profane the saint with error. Zadorozhny worked with tempera-like precision, flattening perspective, echoing the rhythm of ancient icons. And yet, he infused the portrait with a modern gravity, giving Alipio not just holiness but humanity. His eyes are tired, heavy, yet they gleam with an inner light that refuses to dim. The composition is deliberate. Alipio is not distant, not frozen in Byzantine abstraction. He leans toward us, his presence weighty, intimate. His robes, dark and austere, anchor him in the ascetic world of the monastery. Behind him, faint patterns echo frescoes of the Lavra, grounding him in his holy environment. The palette is restrained, earthen ochres, muted reds and deep shadows. But within the darkness burns gold, the eternal color of icons, the symbol of divine radiance. Alipio seems carved from both stone and light, a bridge between heaven and earth. Symbolism breathes through every detail. His hands, slightly rough, hold not wealth or weapon, but the tools of an iconographer, brush, pigments, the fragile panel of wood. His gaze is not toward us but upward, as if seeking approval from God himself. The folds of his robes resemble the curves of a cave, recalling the catacombs of the Kiev Pechersk Lavra, where monks prayed and painted by torchlight. In Alipio, Zadorozhny binds the sacred, the historical and the natural, the earth's soil, the faith's fire, the human hand raised toward eternity. The historical resonance is powerful. In Alipio's time, Kiev was not merely a city, it was the cradle of Eastern Christianity in Slavic lands. Icons were not decoration, they were windows into heaven, conduits of prayer, shields against despair. By giving Alipio form, Zadorozhny revives not only a man but an entire cultural lineage. He reminds us that long before Ukraine endured foreign empires, it had its own saints, its own schools, its own light. Reception of the painting has always been hushed, reverent. It is not a spectacle but a meditation. Viewers stand before Alipio and feel less like spectators and more like pilgrims. They are drawn into his silence, his patience, his quiet strength. The painting does not demand awe, it invites prayer. It whispers that culture is not built by conquerors alone, but by monks in caves, men whose brushes outlast swords. And what is Zadorozhny telling us through Alipio's resurrection? That faith, art and identity cannot be erased. That even when history buries names, they rise again in paint, in memory, in the unbroken chain of culture. Alipio is no longer just a monk of the 11th century. He is every artist who dares to paint against the darkness, every soul who keeps the sacred alive in times of silence. Stand before him and you may feel it, the weight of centuries pressing down, yet also the flame of eternity flickering upward. His eyes seem to say, "We were here, we prayed, we painted, and we remain." And so Alipio endures, Zadorozhny's bridge between ancient caves and modern eyes, between fragile human hands and the everlasting gold of heaven. The moon rose above the night sky of Istanbul as a girl from Padilla stood on the deck of a pirate ship. Her eyes burned with fire, though her hands were bound in chains. She did not yet know that she would become the most powerful woman in the Ottoman Empire. Her name was Anastasia Lisovska. To the world, she would be known as Roksolana. Fate carried her into the harem of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. A girl from distant Ukrainian lands, a captive, was meant to be nothing more than a shadow among hundreds of others. But within her heart lived a force, not just the will to survive, but the desire to rise above all. Her mind, sharp as a blade, and her beauty, glowing like flame, carved her path. She won the love of the Sultan himself. Yet this love was not only tenderness, it was both a sword and a shield. Roksolana became his confidant, the mother of his children, and step by step, the mistress of the empire. She wove words like an intricate tapestry, her smile could signal execution, and her tears could save a life. But was she only a woman hungry for power? In the depths of her soul, Roksolana remembered her homeland, the green fields of Padilla and the ringing of church bells. She never forgot who she was, even within palaces of marble and gold. Her path was heavy, struggles with enemies, intrigues, suspicion. Yet she left a mark that neither time nor hatred could erase. Roksolana transformed from captive to sultana, from a foreigner to a woman who dictated the rules of a mighty empire. She became a legend, echoing still between the lines of history, a story of how one person can change the world, even if once they were nothing more than a prisoner. In the vast stillness of the Ukrainian steppe, where the grass sways like waves beneath an endless sky, Ivan-Valentyn Zadorozhny gave form to a legend. His brush did not simply paint a figure, it conjured the spirit of the nation itself, Mamay. Zadorozhny's Mamay does not appear as a king or a conqueror. Instead, he sits humbly on the ground, legs crossed, a kabza in his hands. His eyes are calm, his face weathered by silence. Yet the stillness is deceptive, it carries the weight of centuries. Each stroke of Zadorozhny's brush reveals something deeper, the endurance of a people who survived wars, invasions and empires, yet refused to let their spirit break. The artist poured into this canvas more than color. He poured memory, sorrow and pride. Ochres and deep greens echo the earth, while warm tones of the figure's skin root him to the land. The kabza, central and luminous, becomes a second voice, not of battle but of song. Mamay's music embodies both lament and hope, the cry of loss and the promise of rebirth. Painted in the turbulence of the 20th century, Zadorozhny's work was more than art, it was resistance. In an era when Ukraine's voice was often silenced, this image stood as quiet defiance. The Cossack Mamay, reborn on canvas, reminded viewers that true power does not lie in crowns, but in identity carried through song and memory. For the people who gazed upon it, Mamay was not only a painting but a mirror. He was every farmer, every soldier, every dreamer who longed for freedom. Zadorozhny gave flesh to a myth, but more than that, he gave Ukraine back a piece of its soul. And so Mamay sits still, eternal, under the endless sky of the steppe. His kabza sings without sound, yet its melody is heard across generations, the song of a nation that cannot be silenced.